Ekulikako, eko mako mako I lokurikalama. O gracious spirits and ancestors who have come before us, who surround us, and who will come after us, we humbly ask for your blessings upon this gathering to help find an alternative way through joint fact-finding to solve the hard problems. We are so grateful for Peter, Masa, and Robbie that created this opportunity for us to puka, talk story, in a safe place for candid and thoughtful discussion. You've guided us over the last couple of days with great mana'o thoughts and mana wisdom to share our individual experiences. And now we ask that you be with us today as we try to find a path to put those individual mana'o into a collective piece that effectively articulates joint fact-finding. We are obviously believers. Fill our hearts and minds with the right words that we might help those in positions to make the hard decisions become believers in joint fact-finding as a viable alternative process to solving hard problems. We have all accepted the kuleana, or responsibility, to facilitate positive change. We ask that you bless and protect each of us as we leave here, and may we find that this is only the beginning of a journey of greater global collaboration amongst us. We graciously ask this in your name, Keaku. Amen. Mahalo.
こんにちは、東京大学の松浦と申します。私はですね、今回、ハワイ大学において、科学技術振興機構の、プロジェクトの一環としてですね、共同事実確認方式、ジョイントファクトファインディングというものに対する関する、国際ワークショップを、開催、させていただくことになりました。ジョイントファクトファインディングというのはですね、専門家の人たちがいろいろな、見解とか専門的な、意見を、特に今回の震災以降、おっしゃっていると思うんですが、そういったような意見をですね、どのような形で政策に反映させるのかっていう、そのための具体的な方法についての、議論を、させていただきました。この方法はアメリカでいろいろ実践がありますので、日本での経験とアメリカでの実践、そして他の国々での経験も含めてですね、我々にとってより良い方法というものを模索できればというふうに思っております。では今回ビデオをまとめさせていただきましたので、そちらの方をご覧いただければと思います。
Следующие 20 минут вы будете смотреть фильм о высококвалифицированных людей для всего мира, дискутировать различные подходы разрешения всемирной проблемы, связанные с спорным окружающей, энергия, здравоохранение и социальные вопросы. Я надеюсь, вам понравится этот фильм. И вы найдете полезной. Spasibo большое.
안녕하세요. 저는 KDI 국제정책대학원의 김동영이라고 합니다. 여러분이 보시는 비디오는 Joint Fact Finding이라는 갈등 관리 기제에 대해서 세계 전문가들이 모여서 회의를 하는 내용을 보시고 계십니다. 2014년 3월 6일에서 8일까지 미국, 호주, 한국, 일본 전문가들이 모여서 사실관계의 해석과 사실관계의 불확실성으로 인한 갈등을 어떻게 해결할 것인가에 대해서 전문가들이 모여서 회의를 합니다. 여러분들이 보실 내용 보시고 많은 참고가 되었으면 좋겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Dobar dan, ja se zovem Borjana Lura Winchester i student sam Nacionalnog mirovnog instituta ovdje na Havajima u Honolulu. Danas, 8. marta 2014. godine, se nalazimo u takozvanom istočno-zapadnom centru ili East West Center Havajskog univerziteta na konferenciji koja se zove Joint Fact Finding, što u prevodu znači zajedničko utvrđivanje činjenica. U sljedećih 20 minuta imat ćete priliku da vidite eksperte koji su se okupili na ovoj konferenciji iz raznih krajeva svijeta, da diskutuju o novom pristupu rješavanju različitih problema koji mogu da budu korišteni od strane ljudi, visokodržavnika i tome slično, koji donose veoma važne odluke u procesu, koji mogu da koriste u procesu donošenja ovih važnih odluka kada su u pitanju energija, zdravstvena zaštita i pitanje bilo kakvih socijalno-političkih problema. Ja se iskreno nadam da ću vam se dopasti sljedećih 20 minuta i da ćete naći korisne stvari u ovom videu. Hvala puno.
Hello everyone, my name is Peter Adler, and I'm very proud to have been one of the co-conveners of some workshops on joint fact-finding recently. Joint fact-finding is a collaboration process in which people work together to try to find solutions to tough problems, usually public policy problems, but others as well. Joint fact-finding is a mediated process or facilitated process in which people come together to try to narrow, if not actually resolve, factual disagreements.
This method called joint fact-finding goes by many names. And so you will hear a little bit of these names sprinkled in. It isn't one thing, it's many things. How do we have a method or a set of methods that can improve some of our public decisions? Not by replacing them with we have good, solid institutions, but how do we add to those and improve public policy decisions? Second, how do we really bring good technical, scientific, economic, legal, political, whatever the information, the data is, how do we bring that onto the table? And then, in the spirit of all ADRs, can we enhance the cooperation and reduce some of the unnecessary friction? Some of the friction is very important. That's how we change. That's how our society moves. But can we streamline it a bit so we go to the heart of the big issues? So a few cautions. The first, as we talk about JFF, this is not a panacea. This cannot fix everything. Cannot fix all the shortcomings and painful pieces of our machinery, our political and legal machinery, but it can add significantly to better decision making if we can accelerate the use of this appropriately. I say appropriate is the key word. Second thing is, this is additive. So the goal isn't to replace the courts or to replace litigation or to replace political decision making. It's a complement to it. It's not a replacement. In general, seems to lend itself, this particular process lends itself to problems in which people can bring data, people can bring evidence, people can be persuasive to each other where there's information available, and the joint fact-finding process is a sorting and an amalgamation of those things. So for example, fact-centered problems might be how many animals and plants are endangered, how will this new road affect drive times, what levels do emissions become toxic. This may be less useful or be a part of value-centered discussions. And those are, which animals and plants should we prioritize for recovery? Shall we put this rare mosquito on the list, or shall we put this panda on the list? I mean, that's a value decision that the fact process could inform but not answer. You can use it to narrow the range of disagreements and say, here's the heart of the issue. These things, secondary, tertiary. You could use this to agree on the kinds of expertise and the kinds of disciplines that might be needed for a further inquiry. You could use this, as it has been done on geothermal and some others, to design the right study and everything. We have a good consensus on this study. You could use it to create very specialized work products that might inform the policy debate, agreed upon forecasts, trends, estimates, and so on. It can take two different forms. It can actually take many forms. But the two we're talking about is, one, it can be a standalone process where somebody says, we just want to do this fact-finding on this. We want to convene a group, put their heads together, design the process, and just address a fairly narrow set of issues, whatever the outputs might be. Or it can be embedded in a longer process. We might say, this is a long-running policy dialogue on rail, and here's the fact pieces right now, but the rail issue will go on.
I don't think joint fact-finding is one thing, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a kind of ecosystem of ideas.
That it enables collective understanding and agreement of technical information about your specific issue in your specific community.
I think the experts is something that must be involved in joint fact-finding.
My assumption is that we can't talk about joint fact-finding without talking about expertise and that doesn't always live locally.
So it's sort of the experts, servants to those who need the decision.
Exactly. They're in service of the broader collaborative process. That's the premise.
Yeah.
My name is David Matz. I teach at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. I teach conflict resolution, and I'm a partner in a mediation firm. And in the last 2.5 years, we've been working on a large, let's call it fact-finding case, involving the development of guidelines for doctors in dealing with the PSA test for prostate cancer. And it's been a fascinating, in some ways revelatory process for me. And so when Peter asked if I would come here, I was delighted because it was an opportunity to really learn from people having a lot more experience than I at that particular set of tasks, what other people are doing and how they do it, and the other ways in which what I've been doing could be done. So it's been sort of nonstop learning since I got here last night, and I expect it to be that way till I get on the plane home.
So I'm Todd Schenk. I am with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Science Impact Collaborative and the Consensus Building Institute, both in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm here because, like everyone else, I'm interested in these questions of joint fact-finding. So you have a issue, a problem, a debate, and a set of actors that are using different sources of information, and it's helpful to have some shared knowledge, some shared foundation of data. And so the question is, how can we do that more effectively? How can we, in the face of multiple questions, multiple sources of knowledge, build some shared set of data? I'm particularly interested in questions of uncertainty. Professor Dong-Young Kim, I thought, made a really interesting point this morning when he said, joint fact-finding, facts imply things that have happened in the past, or they're happening now, and maybe it's not joint fact-finding when we're talking about things that are happening in the future. So in my work around climate change in particular, we don't know exactly what the future is going to look like, right? We're making forecasts, but that doesn't mean that the techniques of joint fact-finding still aren't relevant. In that case, the question is, how do we use multiple possible futures, not come to some conclusion around the data, but how do we use multiple possible futures, multiple models of the future, scenarios of the future concurrently. So again, in the context of building some shared understanding of what those might be and what those might look like to make better decisions now.
One of the reasons why people hire me is because I organize the conversation and I finish things, document things, and then go to the next. So we're not all talking about facts and values and beliefs at the same time. We talk about facts or science or evidence, and then we talk about values. So we're talking about values, whatever. And so I'm not sure that I care about joint fact-finding versus something else, but what's important is that, and I was on a panel at the EPA, it's important that when we advocate for public involvement, public participation, collaborative decision-making, that we're not saying to policymakers that public opinion or public values are trumping science, evidence, or experience, whatever. We're saying that we're going to put all the very best information together to inform this decision.
My name is Jeff Melrose. I live in Hilo. I'm a land planner by profession and currently work in the county of Hawaii. I'm really, my interest in being here really has to do with kind of a lifelong perception that we are not very good at civil discourse and that we have a lot to learn about how to be more civil in our conversations, and as our conversations become more complex, all the more important to learn how to be civil and responsive to good science and technology.
Okay, well, I'm Keith Madsen, and I'm a independent consultant that does urban planning and policy analysis. And I got attracted to joint fact-finding by taking a course from Peter Adler, one of the organizers, but while that was a negotiation course, what appealed to me most was this potential for joint fact finding to kind of cut through some of the like intractable issues in this community and other ones. And it's just, I think, a very effective way under the right circumstances to get more rational thinking, more balanced thinking, more focused thinking, rather than just shouting at each other. The difficulty, I think, is not just in doing it right if it's the way you go, but choosing whether or not an issue is right to begin with for joint fact finding. And that's what we're kind of getting into with this workshop. So the best thing about this session so far is that you got a range of people with different backgrounds and coming from different places, working on different topics that are able to dig beneath the issue and look at the methodologies and see whether or not there are common threads for things that make themselves effective in joint fact finding or not. So that, I think, summarizes most of where I'll go.
Hello, I'm Alejandro Camacho. I'm a professor of law at the University of California, Irvine, and also the faculty director for the Center for Land, Environment, and Natural Resources at UCI. I primarily teach and write in the areas of environmental and natural resources law, particularly focusing on collaborative and adaptive management processes. I also write a fair amount and research a fair amount on climate change and the role that climate change may play in changing the way we think about natural resources and the way we think about environmental issues. I guess I'm here to be a part of the joint fact-finding process because of a fair amount of the work that I've done on collaborative adaptive management and joint fact-finding in that context. And I find it incredibly fascinating work to be looking into, in large part because it's very different than the classic litigation-based model of the law or the classic regulatory model of the law. I'm looking at sort of a different way to go about processes, go about trying to figure out answers to some of the major questions that the environmental agencies and environmental groups try to work through. So part of it is because my research interest falls within joint fact-finding and collaborative adaptive management. Another reason is because as the center director for the Center for Land, Environment, and Natural Resources, we're really looking at trying to think of ways of incorporating joint fact-finding and other collaborative processes in Southern California on environmental issues and land use issues. And I wanted to get a sense from what the experience in other parts of the world and in Hawaii about whether what's being done and how those sort of practices can be translated to Southern California as well. What sort of things we can learn in California that we can't learn, that we haven't learned already. And you know, my impressions of the joint fact-finding session, the workshop so far, it's still early going, but I found it incredibly interesting, really getting a sense of where my mind is percolating, trying to think through, well, how is joint fact-finding different than other kinds of collaborative processes? What is necessary to make joint fact-finding work? And the circumstances for when joint fact-finding may not be a good process to use, that there might be circumstances when more adversarial approaches might make more sense because the parties are not really ready to try to do a more joint approach. So still early going. I'm really interested to see where it goes, but I'm excited about where it's gone so far.
I want to thank all of you for coming today on a Saturday afternoon. I hope this was valuable for you. I remember reading something from Mark Twain who said that no sinner was ever saved after the first 10 minutes of a sermon. So I want to invite you all to stick around, have some coffee, have some tea, whatever we refreshments we are. Thanks to our sponsors and thank you very much.